Hello everyone, welcome to the Lang Focus channel and my name is Paul. Today we're going to talk about African American Vernacular English. African American Vernacular English, which you may also hear referred to as Ebonics, is a group of dialects of English that developed among African American communities in the United States. Because of the expressive and innovative nature of these dialects, they are very influential, and they are the source of many slang expressions and idioms that are used in general American English and even international English. Yet despite the fact that English speakers borrow their favorite pieces of AAVE, there's still the persistent belief that its speakers speak bad English or broken English, as though they're constantly making mistakes when they speak. But any linguist will tell you that's not how language works. AAVE is not broken Standard English. It's simply not Standard English. It's something else. Enslaved African people were first brought to what is now the United States in 1619, and over the next 2 centuries, hundreds of thousands more were brought over. Similar to the development of English-based Creole languages in the Caribbean, AAVE developed from contact between speakers of West African languages and their English-speaking slave masters, as well as indentured servants from Great Britain and Ireland. But while AAVE has some Creole-like features, it's much closer to Standard English than Caribbean Creoles are. One theory suggests that it arose as a result of the slaves learning the dialectal English spoken by the indentured servants, who were poor and oftentimes not proficient in Standard English. Another theory suggests that it developed as a Creole language, but then converged with Standard English through a process of decreolization. The more accepted theory is the first one, but there was probably also some Creole influence from the slaves brought to the US from the Caribbean. With Black Americans living as a largely separate community, first under slavery, then under segregation, it makes sense that they would develop their own enduring dialects, and it also makes sense that they would develop their own in-group expressions and idioms that were difficult for hostile outsiders to understand. The Great Northward Migration of the 20th century helped establish AAVE as an enduring dialect group throughout the country. First off, let me be clear that not all African Americans speak AAVE, and there are some people who do speak it who aren't African American. And as is typically the case with non-standard varieties of a language, AAVE exists on a continuum with Standard English, and people mix the two of them to varying degrees depending on the situation, their socioeconomic status, and their perception of the dialect. And it's also true that there's variation within AAVE based on region and generation. But I'll describe some typical features that are unquestionably a part of AAVE. People often associate AAVE with its slang, especially words and expressions that have crossed over into other varieties of English, often through music and other media. Words like dis, which is short for disrespect, beef, meaning a conflict, squash, meaning to put an end to something, cosign, meaning to vouch for someone, give props, meaning to give praise or recognition to someone, and lots of other expressions like that. But this kind of slang is not representative of AAVE. Slang by its very nature is always changing. The vast majority of vocabulary is Standard English vocabulary, even though sometimes words are used slightly differently, either in form or in meaning. The core of AAVE is really its grammar and its phonology. Let's examine its grammar. Verbs. There are a lot of little differences in how verbs are used. First, is and are often left out.
She over there.
That's before a phrase showing location.
You a funny dude.
That's before a noun phrase.
They kinda crazy.
Here it's left out before an adjective. They're also left out before the present progressive ing.
He don't know what he talking about.
Note that is and are the only forms of to be that are dropped. Am is not left out, and neither are the past tense forms was and were, more on those later, or be. Also, is and are can't be dropped at the end of a sentence.
I don't know what it is.
The basic rule is that they can only be dropped in AAVE in the same contexts in which they can become contractions in Standard English. Habitual be. There are contexts in which speakers of AAVE use be when is or are would be used in Standard English. For example,
we be working 24/7.
Be has a special purpose when used like this. It indicates habitual action. This sentence is also possible.
We working.
But that just means working right now, rather than habitually working over an extended period of time. Another example.
He always be telling people what to do.
So you can see that the use of be is not a random choice or mistake. It's systematic and it's grammatically correct according to the rules of AAVE. There's also an intensive habitual marker. This is similar to habitual be, but is more emphatic.
He stay running late for work.
This means that it happens pretty much all the time. It's habitual. There's also an intensified continuous marker, steady. It shows that the action is in progress, but not necessarily habitual over a longer period of time.
You never listen. I've been told you to stop, but you steady playing.
For the word playin' here, I would probably say playing around or messing around. Lack of person-number agreement. Before we saw this sentence,
He don't know what he talking about.
this part, he don't, may have stood out to you as different. Verb conjugations are generally flattened so that they are the same regardless of person and number.
They was acting crazy.
They was rather than they were. In the present tense, this usually means that the third-person singular form doesn't have an S.
Yeah, he work at the shop down the street.
He work rather than he works. That's the basic pattern most of the time. A common expression that seems to contradict this rule is "gots to."
Okay, you tripping. I gots to go.
Notice the S on gots even when it's not in the third-person singular. Gots to seems to have developed as distinct from gotta, both being contractions of have got to. Gots to is more emphatic than gotta. Completive or perfective done. The word done is frequently used as an aspect marker showing that an action has been completed.
You know you done messed up, right?
This is often interpreted as referring to an action completed in the very recent past, but that's not necessarily the case. It could be further back in the past, but using done gives the feeling that the situation after the action is different than the situation before it.
He done woke up the whole neighborhood.
The word been is also used with verbs in two ways. One way is called unstressed been. It's used like have been or has been in standard English.
She been married for a long time.
There's also stressed been. When been, pronounced more like been, is stressed, it means that the action occurred a long time ago, or that the action or state has been continuing for a long time.
She been married.
This means that she's been married for a long time. The stress on been indicates that the marriage began in the remote past, so the phrase for a long time is unnecessary. In fact, when using stressed been, it's actually ungrammatical to include an adverbial phrase like that.
I been finished my homework, ma.
There are a few special ways to express the future in AAVE. One way is using gon or gonna, which is a contraction of going to.
We gonna visit them soon.
Gonna is used in casual speech in a lot of varieties of English, so this is no big surprise. Another more distinctive future form is finna.
I'm finna go home.
This is a contraction of fixin' to, which is frequently heard in dialects of the southern US, like I'm fixin' to go home.
I'm finna hit the door in a second.
Hit the dough, or hit the door, meaning leave. There's also a special form used in the first-person singular, I'ma.
I'ma wait right here while you get ready.
I'ma developed as a contraction of I'm gonna. It may be a contraction of I'm gonna, but it's now used slightly differently, as a declaration of immediate action, whereas I'm gonna, or I'm gon, is a little further into the future. Negation. The negative in AAVE is frequently expressed with ain't, though not in all contexts. With a verb in the simple present tense, don't is used rather than ain't. He doesn't live here anymore.
He don't live here no more.
In the present continuous, ain't is used.
Man, I ain't even trying to hear all that.
This is like saying, I have no interest in hearing what you're saying. Notice that ain't often blends in with the words around it. I ain't is more like I ain't. I ain't even is more like I ain't even.
Man, I ain't even trying to hear all that.
In the past tense it's used, I didn't say anything.
I ain't say nothing.
It's also used with the present perfect. I haven't said anything.
I ain't said nothing.
By the way, notice that there is a specific difference in the verb tense between I ain't say and I ain't said. Those aren't random variations. You might have also noticed that anymore and anything are replaced with their negative counterparts, resulting in a double negative. Actually, both that and ain't appear in other dialects of English as well, and aren't unique to AAVE. But it does have a unique kind of double negative, or sometimes triple negative construction called negative inversion.
Can't nobody sing like she can.
In standard English, this would be, nobody can sing like she can.
Ain't nobody going home till we finish.
Nobody's going home until we finish. In this construction, the auxiliary verb moves to the beginning of the sentence and becomes negative. Possessives. Possession in AAVE tends to be shown by syntax, with the apostrophe s ending deleted. For example,
Yeah, I was at my dad's house.
Notice that the word dad has no apostrophe S ending, but it's clear that dad is the one who possesses the house, because dad comes right before house in the sentence. For possessive adjectives in the third person, subject pronouns are used.
They was looking for their friends.
Notice that they appears twice, once as the subject and again as the possessor. But again, we know the second one is possessive because it appears right before the noun friends. Ass constructions. AAVE features several interesting uses of the word ass. First, it intensifies an adjective.
We was at some random ass bar.
This has been adopted by speakers of other varieties of English to some extent, and even some speakers of standard English use it in casual settings when they want to be more expressive. It also reminds me of something Australians and New Zealanders say to intensify adjectives. They might say something like, "This beer is cheap as." Not ass, but as. Second, together with a possessive, it's used in place of a pronoun, but with a sense of urgency.
Yo ass gonna learn.
This means you're going to learn, but the subtext is that you're chastising or warning someone. Third, it can also be used as a reflexive in place of self.
Get your ass inside the house.
That just means get yourself inside the house. Yo ass replaces yourself. This is used in other varieties of English as well, but in a much more limited capacity. Pronunciation. African American Vernacular English also has a characteristic accent, or rather, a range of accents that share some common features. We can't talk about all those features here, but let's look at a few of them. R-less pronunciation. AAVE tends to be R-less at the end of words, similar to the accents of England and some Northeastern American accents.
Brother, mother, sister.
At least in some varieties of AAVE, when R appears after O or U, the R disappears and the word ends in an O sound. Door becomes
Do.
Floor becomes
Flow.
Your becomes
Yo.
Sure becomes
Show.
Some diphthongs become monophthongs. For example, my ride becomes
My ride.
Ride refers to a car, by the way. In standard English, the vowel in my and ride is a diphthong, basically meaning that the vowel shifts from one to another within a single syllable. I. In AAVE, it's just one continuous vowel sound. Ah. Also, my might be pronounced with a schwa when it's unstressed in rapid speech, like m. Changes in th sounds, in other words, interdental fricatives, th and the. The voiceless th sound, th, is sometimes replaced by f. Bath.
Bath.
South.
South.
The way these th sounds are rendered as f reminds me of some dialects spoken in England. Voiceless th sometimes becomes t or t. This sound, t, is a voiceless dental stop, which is somewhere between t, a t sound, and th, the voiceless th sound. With might become
Wit.
And in that sample, you can hear the glottalization of the t sound. It often becomes a glottal stop, just like t does in general American English in certain contexts, like at the end of a word. Voiced the sometimes becomes d or d. This is a voiced dental stop. You could say that it's somewhere between d, a d sound, and a voiced the sound. That might be
That.
Some consonants are silent. This includes the final consonant in some consonant clusters. For instance, past is pronounced
Pass.
and hand becomes
Hand.
To be clear, this happens in other accents as well, including mine, but it tends to be more consistent in AAVE, even in some contexts in which I would pronounce the sound. Also, initial consonant sounds are sometimes dropped in auxiliary verbs like don't and quasi-auxiliary verbs like gonna. I don't know becomes
I don't know.
This process probably also resulted in the future form ima that we saw before. Some words have different stress, which can actually undo the vowel reduction of Standard English. In Standard English, well, at least in General American English, this word is pronounced police. In AAVE, it's pronounced
Police.
Actually, the man in the recording stresses the second syllable, but it's often stressed on the first syllable. And as with some other features of AAVE, this is also a feature of Southern speech in general. So that's interesting, right? In my accent, the O is dropped, or at least reduced. But in AAVE, the O is clearly pronounced. So when sounds are dropped in a dialect like AAVE, is that any different from me dropping certain sounds when I speak? The truth is that the phonology of any spoken variety of English is separate from English spelling, and every variety has somewhat different phonological rules that its speakers follow. Should speakers of AAVE be encouraged to give up their dialect in favor of standard English? Well, keep in mind that all over the world, in various different languages, there are dialects that people use in informal situations, while they learn the standard language at school and use that in formal situations, including writing. There are dialects of German, Japanese, Arabic, and countless other languages, and people switch between dialectal speech and standard speech depending on the context. You can make a good argument that everyone in a society should learn the standard language well in order to increase their opportunities and to improve communication between different segments of society. But there's nothing that makes a dialect incorrect if your intention is to speak that dialect. While speaking a dialect at a job interview might be incorrect in that context, speaking it with your friends is not. So standard English is clearly an important tool, but AAVE is not inferior to it, it's simply different from standard English, just as all dialects are. That includes the dialects of Great Britain, Ireland, Australia, and everywhere else that English is spoken. The question of the day. To speakers of African American Vernacular English, to what extent do you use it in daily life? And to what extent do you use standard English? And can you add any features of AAVE that didn't appear in the video? And to others, are there any words or expressions you used that originally came from AAVE? What are they? Leave your responses in the comments down below. The man who recorded the audio samples for this video, Lawrence, is an artist who creates fantastic portraits like these, and he can create custom portraits of you too. I recommend you follow him on Instagram and check out his work. I also want to give a big shout out to all the LangFocus Patreon supporters, especially the top tier patrons whose names are on the screen. Check out patreon.com/langfocus and check out the benefits of the various tiers. And to everyone, thank you for watching and have a nice day.